Hello friends. The US Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sopko, has said it again, highlighting the contradictions that had accompanied the US intervention, US presence in Afghanistan for over 20 years. Why did the US-backed Afghan government collapse? What are the reasons? Ghost soldiers, the dependence of the Afghan army on the US air power, US contractors and other enablers such as members of the Afghan government, including President Ashraf Ghani. These are the factors John Sopko highlighted once again in his address to the reporters, in fact in his address to the Military Reporters and Editors Association at Arlington, Virginia on October the 29th. John Sopko, or SIGA, has consistently reported on these issues in all the 53 quarterly reports that this office has been issuing since 2012. One issue John Sopko highlighted in his address to the Military Reporters Association was the dishonest reporting by different US agencies and institutions. John Sopko's latest statement is in fact a literal damning indictment of the USAID, Department of State and Department of Defense, the way they colluded with the Congress as well as looked away from the massive security and corruption issues in Afghanistan.
We all know that U.S. agencies have not made honest reporting easy for either SIGAR or for you about America's longest war. Now, we have a recent example that we talked about in this quarterly report I'd like to discuss briefly with you today. As we report in today's quarterly report, shortly after the fall of Kabul, the State Department wrote to me and other oversight agencies requesting that we quote unquote temporarily suspend access to all of our audit, inspection, and financial reports that were on our website because the department was afraid that information included therein would put Afghan allies at risk.
Isn't it paradoxical that a US watchdog has been exposing the massive corruption within the Afghan government, holding them responsible for the fall of Kabul to Taliban in mid-August, but certain US agencies are now protecting the same corrupt elements, calling them as assets and allies, including former President Ashraf Ghani. John Sopko has also questioned the emergency evacuation flights from Kabul after the Taliban seized power there. And that's also a bizarre story. A number of people have been talking about it, but John Sopko has nailed it in this latest statement.
Now, let me be clear. I strongly believe that Afghans who are at genuine risk of reprisal due to their work for the United States government, NGOs, news outlets, and other groups should and must be protected. The protection of Afghans at legitimate risk of harm is not an issue to quibble over, and something he has respected over the 10 years that I've been there. But despite repeated requests, the State Department was never able to describe any specific threats to individuals that were supposedly contained in our reports. Nor did State ever explain how removing our reports now from public dissemination would possibly protect anyone, since many of those reports were years old and already extensively disseminated worldwide. Nevertheless, with great reservation, I acceded to State's initial request and pulled down all of our reports because it was at the height of the evacuation and because I thought that request would only be temporary.
Quite interesting, isn't it? In a country known as the torchbearer of democratic rights and freedom of information, one government institution is being asked to censor hundreds of references from already published reports about the way Afghanistan was governed since 2001.
The State Department requested that SIGAR redact Ashraf Ghani's name from every one of our reports. Now, I'm sure President Ghani may wish to be excised from the annals of history, but I don't believe he faces any additional threat, or is there any threat to any other Afghan by mentioning his name in our reports. State Department also requested that we consider redacting a reference to quote-unquote Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville, Alabama. Now, this is a bit bizarre, especially for those of you who have visited that arsenal, that somehow its name itself is a threat to Afghans. Possibly, maybe by uttering its name, it's a threat to Alabama. State also asked us to consider redacting the name of a USAID American, an American citizen, who testified publicly before Congress in 2017. Even though his testimony remains on the website of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and a hearing video is available, I think, by C-SPAN.
Another issue is withholding of information on the security front since 2015, when the Department of Defense and the government of Ashraf Ghani decided to withhold information on combat operations, on the casualties that were happening in Afghanistan, how you can keep information on the performance of the security forces from the public. So this is what John Sopko had to say on this issue.
For example, DoD restricted from public release a range of information going back to 2015 on the performance of the Afghan security forces, purportedly at the request of the Afghan government. This included information such as casualty data, unit strength, training and operational deficiencies, tactical and operational readiness of Afghan military leadership, comprehensive assessments of Afghan security force leadership, and operational readiness rates down to the corps level. In essence, the information withheld at the request of the Afghan government is nearly all the information you would have needed to determine whether the Afghan security forces were a real fighting force or a house of cards waiting to collapse. In light of recent events, it is not surprising why the Afghan government, and maybe some people in the Department of Defense, wanted to keep that information under lock and key.
The US Congress has now asked John Sopko Sigar to basically go after some questions. The questions are, why did the Afghan government collapse? Why the Afghan security forces collapsed, crumbled, and how the US train, advise, and support, assist efforts may have contributed to that collapse. One question is continued risks to the USAID funded projects, as well as whether the Taliban would have any access to projects which have been underway. So these are a few questions. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, even if those questions are answered, even if Sigar manages to undig the truth, will that truth be made public, or will it once again become hostage, victim to the geopolitical considerations that have so far accompanied the US policy on Afghanistan? One thing is very clear, crystal clear, meanwhile. The entire security establishment of the United States is being called out by another organ of the state, and that is the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, the watchdog. At least one window of information related to America's overseas operations, as well as on the huge contractors industry, the American contractors industry, that has been a major contributory factor to the pilferage and abuse of hundreds of billions of dollars by the Afghan elites and US contractors alike. How they all thrived on American taxpayers' money. This also explains the contradictions of the United States of America.